Quite possibly the most annoying, mind-numbing, soul-draining argument that springs up every time Final Fantasy gets a new release is about its genre. It's always a bit of an odd one because Final Fantasy as a series has never really had a singular genre. You can argue turn-based, but even then, you're kind of stretching things. It's received significant and nearly constant revision over the years, including the implementation of the ATB mechanic, giving the game a pseudo-real-time combat system, just with the skeletal framework of a turn-based RPG. Then we get the MMO games with 11 and 14, 14 being my favorite Final Fantasy overall, and the combat is real-timed but in the style of a hotkey MMORPG. Then you get the real-time games like 15-7 Remake Final Fantasy Origin, Crisis Core, and soon-to-be Final Fantasy 16, amongst probably other spin-offs. Final Fantasy as a series is old, and has changed its style over time, because that's also one of the points of Final Fantasy. Each iteration is fundamentally different to one another, and is its own thing, and that's where I draw the line separating Final Fantasy from other series that have massive direction changes, even within its own genre. Take Halo for instance. After Halo Reach, it had a new developer, 343 Industries, and their version of Halo did not feel like Halo in a lot of ways. From massive revisions to the combat system, to pivots in story direction, atmosphere, tension. It had its moments, but on the whole, and especially with the last two games, it lost a lot of the essence of what made a Halo game feel like a Halo game. But why is that? Because Halo had an established formula, an established feel, and an established aesthetic, and an established type of storytelling. Final Fantasy doesn't have that. Final Fantasy, honestly, its identity is the fact that each game is fundamentally different to one another. You can't take games like Final Fantasy IV and Final Fantasy VIII and just put them next to each other and say, this is the same game. It's the same series, but from the feel, the aesthetic, hell, the gameplay as well, it's fundamentally different. It has certain overarching threads that tie them together, like certain aesthetics, certain items like chocobos and moogles. Sure, there's some things like that tie them together, but the games themselves are still so fundamentally different. But that's also what makes Final Fantasy feel like Final Fantasy. Each game is its own entity. From world to theme to characters to even the aesthetic, each game is fundamentally different. And for the longest time, the only thing really holding them all together was that each game was technically a turn-based game, or at least a pseudo-turn-based game with the ATB system, which I'd argue really straddles the line between turn-based and its own genre. It feels more like, and I've heard this be thrown around a bit from time to time, that the ATB gauge feels like they were trying to at least emulate the feel of a real-time game just within the confines of a turn-based game. Like, by the letter of the definition, sure, you can't consider it turn-based, but the feel of the ATB games, the tension and the pace that it elicits, compared to the traditional turn-based, like 10, is so fundamentally different that they feel like separate genres, even with the weight toggle. So for a series predicated on each entry being fundamentally different to one another, with a few connecting threads, changing the genre seems like a natural thing to do. And they have done that from time to time, either introducing or removing fundamental gameplay mechanics from each game. And I get the concern from traditional fans that turn-based games could be seen as dying and many people don't like non-turn-based games. I'm kinda here there on it personally. I think the combat in 16 looks very impressive. However, the opposite is also true. There are people who simply don't like turn-based games, and that's fine. You can argue that Final Fantasy is traditionally turn-based, so why pivot the formula? I'd argue that I'm in favor of change when it works for the game being made, and I think it has for the recent games, despite how controversial that opinion might be. And also, changing things to suit the current game is also a mainstay of Final Fantasy. Sure, 15 isn't the best, mainly because its plot sucks, but the open world and just chilling with the boys and teleporting around the place with Noctis with that sword is what made me love that game, straight up. And I absolutely adore Final Fantasy VII Remake style. It's up close and personal with Midgar, and it just helps me feel immersed in it all. And the way that game handles its combat makes each character feel distinct from a gameplay perspective with unique moves, where when I played Final Fantasy VII a few years back, I kinda lost that for the most part because of the materia system. Some may argue that blank canvas character design is preferable, and I do think it is enjoyable, but I still got that with the materia system in the remake, and I had a ton of fun with it. while having each character feel distinct and have their personality come through with the gameplay. It's not that one system is inherently better than the other, I just think they both have a place. And pivoting over to Final Fantasy 16 again, it looks like it's going to be up close and personal with fast combat and lean into the epic side of things, which I just don't get from turn-based games. The style and feel that 16 is going for feels like it was designed to pair up perfectly with the combat that it apparently has. Sure, summons are a cool idea, but mechanically it's just press a button and then just go. And that's appealing to many, and that's fine, and I still enjoy turn-based games. Hell, I'm a massive fan of Persona, for instance. But for the style 16 is going for, I just think the combat direction they have looks like it's a good match for it. It works for the dual perspective when you really think about it. It's going with transitioning from small-scale person-v-person combat with Clive to giant monster icon battles with Ifrit. And being able to transition in terms of scale like that adds something to the cinematography and immersion that is unique to action games of that style. Especially when it comes to the more sprite-based Final Fantasy games, whenever they introduced a big summon for you to fight like Bahamut or something. I just never got that sense of scale. The one time they really managed to do this, I think, was Kefka with Final Fantasy VI. They did a great job with the tower in that regard, so it can work. It's just, if you're trying to do this on a consistent basis for a game, then the style 16 is going for just feels like a natural thing to pair it up with. So is there a right answer to this? No, and that's what makes this whole conversation kind of annoying every time it springs up, is that it just simply comes down to personal preference. But whenever this argument comes up, people on the internet pretend to act like there is a singular correct answer and that all other opinions are invalid, when that's just simply not the case. And instead of debating about the qualities of the current game being released, it always just morphs into a conversation about the evolution of Final Fantasy and why the current era sucks or the old era sucks. And I don't get why this battle line needs to be drawn when each style has its own merits. Sure, have every Final Fantasy hit? No, I don't think so. But that's also one of the natures of Final Fantasy. There's so many of them of so many different varying types and archetypes when it comes to gameplay and story and world and atmosphere and music, that your least favorite may be someone else's favorite and my favorite may be someone else's least favorite. For instance, there's a lot of people that adore Final Fantasy XII. It's my least favorite by far. The gameplay just did not hit for me. And the story I felt was a watered-down version of Star Wars, but that's my personal preference. Other people will disagree. I think the World of Ivalice was very intriguing, and I want to explore more of it. Port Final Fantasy Tactics, for the love of God. And one of my favorite Final Fantasies that's not an MMO is Final Fantasy VII, and that's not... And while that is a very popular Final Fantasy, it's not everybody's favorite. Hell, there's some people that don't even like Final Fantasy VII, and that's fine. That's the nature of Final Fantasy. Each game is its own separate adventure, its own separate story. And by the nature of having the series be like that, not every game's going to hit for everybody. And that comes down to the gameplay as well. Not everybody liked the ATB system, or liked the true turn-based system of older Final Fantasies. Not everyone did. And just like not everyone liked them back then, not everyone's gonna like this current direction Final Fantasy is taking. And while I would personally like to see at least some spin-offs of Final Fantasy games that elicit more of the turn-based traditional style, it's not like Square isn't making them. Octopath 2 came out like a week ago or something. But yeah, I get it. Having that gameplay paired up with the aesthetics of a Final Fantasy game is very appealing, and I get that, because from time to time I do crave that myself. But I think the important thing to do here is to judge each game on its own merits and what it's trying to achieve, and not everybody's going to like that, and that's fine. Not every game will appeal to everybody. If it did, it would probably just be watered down and not greatly appeal to any one person. To me, Final Fantasy 16 seems like a game that is going to appeal to me a lot, from art style to graphics to story to theme, to gameplay, even to characters. It feels like a Final Fantasy game that's taken all the aspects of the series up to this point that I really liked, and just rolling with that, with a combat system that feels far more up my alley traditionally. I still like turn-based styles from time to time, but I don't like to play only exclusively turn-based games. That's just me, and your opinions may be different, and that's entirely fine, because that's what they all are at the end of the day, it's just opinions. And I do hope we get more turn-based games in the future. I think we still get them. I don't think the genre itself is dying or anything, but I do hope we get some more in the future. I think that'd be a really cool direction for Final Fantasies, being able to straddle the line of having both turn-based styles of games when they're appropriate, and these real-time games when they're appropriate as well. So I'm going to call the video there for the day. Thank you all for tuning in. My pleasure making the video. If you enjoyed it, please leave a like and subscribe. It really helps the channel out and helps support future content, and I greatly appreciate it. And hit the bell icon to be notified for when I upload in the future. Leave a comment down below with your favorite Final Fantasy game. Was it 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14? Maybe even 15. That's fine. Was it one of the spin-offs? Was it one of the non-mainline numbered games like Final Fantasy VII Remake or Crisis Core? Let me know. I'd love to hear your thoughts and hear your opinions and hear your perspectives. Stay safe. Have a great day. Go play some video games if you can. And as always, I'll see you again next time. Bye-bye, everybody.